I remember listening to Arjuna like make his case, right, for him and the other guy. And there's all of these scientific studies on reincarnation, especially like, these young children who have these experiences or say that they have these past memories, these past life memories. And there's a whole bunch of research on this. I think, what were you telling me one day that like the research, like just to scratch the surface, would just be like mind blowing.
Enormous. 3 bookshelves full of just research.
Yeah.
Yeah. One researcher counted it up. That's not good research. That's just research in general.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the job of somebody who wants to get into that to figure out the good stuff. But even the good stuff will take up about 1 full bookshelf of just studies, scientific studies on this.
Wow. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So what is kind of like the argument for, reincarnation? What does that actually look like? And then what are not to give away like, your whole strategy in this debate, but like what are some of the reasons why you're kind of skeptical of the argument that's made there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's many different ways that scientists or researchers, because not all of them are scientists, have tried to sort of get at this. Some do hypnotic regression.
Okay.
Ask people to go into hypnosis, tell us about a past life, write down the details, and try and confirm that. Now, why that's not normally scientifically accepted is because you can never rule out this person got this information in some other way, subconsciously stored it, and then is saying this in this hypnotic regression. And there's similar studies done with people who don't have hypnotic regression. They just say they know these facts. You can never rule out the fact that this could be obtained some other way. The studies that are of most interest are the ones that Arjuna and I will be talking about. And they come from the University of Virginia, a guy who passed away recently, Ian Stevenson, and his successor, Jim Tucker. And they decided they needed to rule this out. So they only did studies on children, normally before the age of 5, because that reduces the amount of time that these kids could have to acquire this information. Normally kids that age, they barely remember anything at all, let alone highly detailed facts about past lives, people's names, addresses, and stuff like that. And just narrowing it into that, they had some real interesting things. So for instance, they have cases where kids have birthmarks that correlate with the wounds of the person who they claim they died. They have facts that they were able to recognize spouses and name them, and children and friends with families that lived miles away, because they claim to be the person who they claim to be, their spouse, their children, their friends, having never met them, according to the parents, having never met them. So there's real interesting, that sort of information. Then it becomes sort of a very live option of how do we explain this? It could
that
be...
already, the way that you explained that just now, like already has me like opened up to the possibility of reincarnation. Yeah, and
they are very interesting it's a very interesting topic, and some of the cases are absolutely shocking. I am very, very skeptical, as are quite a few other researchers. For some researchers, that says open them up to it. For other researchers are skeptical, and I think they're skeptical for good reasons. And I won't give all the details, but number one is the fact that quite often this comes years later, sometimes up to 10 to 15 years later.
What do you mean?
So the testimony from the parents or from the kids will come years later.
Okay, so like they'll say, 10 years later that the kid at the age of 3 or 4 was saying all these things.
Right.
Okay.
So 10 years later, like memories from 10 years in the past are going to get distorted, especially monumental, exaggerated events.
Yeah.
Right. Exaggeration can easily creep in. Number two, virtually all of these come from cultures or families that already believed in reincarnation. So there comes this kind of
primed.
Yeah, they're primed for it, and there's this idea that the parents might have been encouraging this, the culture might have been encouraging this. So they say, "Can you identify your spouse?" One of these things is they'll take a child and say, who claims to be this other person, say, "Can you identify your spouse?" And they'll all be subtly looking at the spouse, waiting for the kid to identify the person. So the kid, all he has to do is locate the eyes, and just by the power of subconscious suggestion is able to identify the spouse or the kids. And in these cultures, they don't realize it's going on, but this is well known in psychology that this happens all the time, this subtle power of suggestion. And you're able to sort of have these amazingly confirmed facts, and then 10 years down the road, you're not able to figure that out.
What about the birthmarks, and then also remembering like the names of the children and stuff?
Yeah. So when you actually get into the actual details of that, quite often the names are not exact. They'll say like Marie, and it'll be like Maria, but Ian Stevenson will still count that as a near hit, or he'll only count the names that they get right, and he'll leave out the names they get wrong. And if you actually get into the very details, it doesn't often make it into the books itself, but he does point you to it. When you look at the details, you'll notice the kids get a lot of misses as well. And the birthmarks, so for instance, in one famous case, it did correspond according to the parents, but when Stevenson got there, he reported the birthmark had apparently moved. So not all of these are quite as amazing as they come out when you first hear them.
Yeah.
And there's also the sense that there's been other researchers who've said it's because the birthmarks correspond to the wounds of the person people know are dead, that they'll begin suggesting to the child, you might be the reincarnation of this person. They're mentally associating them with that person, and therefore priming the child to begin to think of themselves in that way.
Yeah, it's a good response. There's some good skepticism right there.
And that's going to be line 1. Line 1 is the evidence.
That's only one.
Line 2, here's the thing though. Let's assume all this evidence is good, right?
Okay.
Does this show reincarnation? Unfortunately, for people who support reincarnation, there are quite a few other people who use the exact same evidence to confirm theories that have nothing to do with reincarnation, but equally explain the evidence. And I'll get into that into debate because there's quite a few of these.
Okay.
But the whole point is we might think this might be reincarnation, but how do we know that that's the best explanation for the given evidence? The evidence itself doesn't demand reincarnation. There's plenty of other explanations. As soon as we're allowing these sort of supernatural explanations in, there's plenty of other explanations that other scientists, other researchers have taken this and said, look, it confirms what I say.
Yeah, I just want to sit here and think about that for a while. That's really good. I mean, well, yeah, there's other possible explanations on the horizon that you could look at, the set of different possible explanations that could explain the data.
You want me to give just one example?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so for instance, there is a biologist out of Cambridge. His name is Rupert Sheldrake.
Okay. He's
a bit of a maverick within the biological community, but he's got this idea called morphic resonance, which is this idea that memory is a sort of fundamental feature of the universe. And he uses this to explain migration patterns for creatures that have never migrated. He uses this to explain developmental patterns, because development right now in creatures is a bit mysterious. He uses this to explain a lot of things. When Stevenson's work came out, that children are remembering things from other individuals, he trumpeted it as evidence for morphic resonance. And the reason he gave for it is because similar structures, his idea is that similar structures will cause the remembering of similar things. So if a child has a similar brain structure to a past person, it will provoke the same memory. It's not that that person is the same person, but that similar structures provoke the same memory. So the child will have the memory even though they aren't that person. Mm-hmm. And this is how he explains migration patterns, which are quite a few are completely mysterious. Monarch butterflies, when they're born, they never complete the migration pattern. They know when they're born where they're at on the migration pattern. And his idea is because they share the same structure as the other monarch butterflies, they're inheriting that memory, that sort of social memory from the species. And he thinks the same thing explains it in humanity. Now, I'm not saying I believe that or I buy into that, but as far as evidence goes, there's a lot more that idea explains than reincarnation. So the explanatory scope of morphic resonance, Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, is far greater than reincarnation is. So just on a scale of which should we prefer, from an explanatory perspective, morphic resonance is superior. And that's just one. There's many other ideas. So when you begin to add all of these up together, reincarnation, the likelihood of reincarnation becomes diminishingly small.
Hello, Cameron here. Thanks for watching this little clip. If you want more, there's actually a whole interview this clip came from. Just click the link on the screen. Oh, and by the way, we post 2 to 3 new videos a week. So if you're interested in apologetics at all, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you can catch our latest content. And then lastly, remember that Christianity is true.